Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. Do you need strong methods for verifying vendor bank details to avoid fraud and return payments? Spot warning signs, set up validation procedures, and learn how automation is the key to reducing risks and issues in manual vendor banking validations. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 298. Validate your vendor's U.S. bank account details to avoid fraud and return payments in 5 steps. Now, today's podcast episode is really a replay, of a webinar that I did back in March 20th. It was sponsored by Vendor Info, but it was only 30 minutes and it was just me talking about 5 steps to validate your vendor's bank account details. So I'm going to replay it here, but I am also going to put a link in the show notes if you would like to watch the webinar recording and also download the handouts. Now, I had 3 handouts here. The first one was, of course, a PDF of the presentation. And then I had a handout from Vendor Info about how to reduce the risk of payment fraud 2023. And then I also had a training schedule for Vendor Process Training Center 2024 if you are interested in training at the vendor process level. So I'm going to go ahead and play the recording, and I hope you find some valuable content. All right, well, we are right at the top of the hour, and we are going to go ahead and get started because if you've attended any of my webinars in the past, you know I have a lot of information, and I always end up trying to squeeze it into 30 minutes. So welcome to this month's monthly webinar series for 2024, hashtag in 5 steps. So every month, the third Wednesday of the month from 1 to 1:30 Eastern Time, I have something that you can build or process that you can do in 5 steps that will help your manual vendor process. Now, this month's webinar is validate your vendor's U.S. bank account details to avoid fraud and return payments in 5 steps. Now, notice I included in and return payments because a lot of times we always kind of focus on the fraud, but not that rework that comes when you don't have or when you send inaccurate payment details. And that can be a lot of work. So I did include that in today's webinar. Now, I am Debra R. Richardson, and this webinar is sponsored by Financial Operations Networks. That's how you can come on and get this information for free. And I'll have more information on how they automate bank account validation to avoid both fraud and return payments. But first, let's take care of some housekeeping items. So tomorrow, you will receive a link to a separate or a separate link, a different link to the recording if you would like to rewatch it or share it with any of your colleagues that you think would find this information helpful. So this session is being recorded, but keep in mind there is a separate link to the recording, and that's because that's the only way that I can also get the handouts attached to the recording. Now, there are 3 handouts today. I have from Financial Operations Networks. They have a how to reduce the risk of payment fraud through automatic or automatic verification of bank account ownership. So that's a PDF. It's actually a really good read. Also, if you like this type of training, I have a vendor process training schedule for 2024 where you can enroll in 56 different training sessions throughout 2024. Those are paid, but it does include the new W-9 training because that new W-9 finally came out on March 6th. So it does include that. And then also there is a PDF of this presentation, and the links that are included in this presentation, when you download the PDF, those links are clickable. Now, I skipped over the thing for the questions, so I'll try to have up to 5 minutes available for questions at the end, but make sure you put your questions in the question section as you think of them, and then that way they'll be ready for that 5-minute slot, hopefully up to 5 minutes at the end. Now, real quick about me, a quick bio. I used to be an AP senior manager. I managed a team of 17. All we did was vendor setup and maintenance. We had 2,000 vendor requests that we processed per month, and we had 140,000 vendors across 7 different ERPs. Now, for a portion of that time, I also manage all of the payments that went out as well. So dealt with the collecting of the banking details, also definitely dealt with the return of the payments. Now though, I work as a trainer, a consultant, and speaker to help teams like yours clean up their vendor data, clean up their vendor processes so they pay the right vendor. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda. Now, I am going to turn off my camera just to make sure that there are no technical issues now that I've gone through the intro and the bio. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. Your screen should get bigger and we can go over the agenda. All right, so the agenda will first look at the pain points and risk in the manual collection and validation of U.S. vendor banking. And I have to tell you, I know that some of these things I am already preaching to the choir, but we will go over the risks that I see, and then we'll get into the N5 steps, how to validate your vendor's U.S. bank account details to avoid fraud and return payments. And then we will get, hopefully have up to 5 minutes to answer any questions that you have. First though, I do have a poll that I would like to launch. So let me go ahead and get that out. And it should be, let's launch that. All right, so you should see it now. And the question that we're asking is, do you have an automated solution for verifying bank account ownership? Would love to hear if you do or not. A is yes, B is no, but planning to deploy one in 6 months. C is no, but planning to deploy one in 6 to 12 months. And then D is no, and no plans to deploy one. So go ahead and answer that. I'll probably give about 20 more seconds to hopefully get at least more than half, maybe up to 70% of everybody's voting. So go ahead, looks like we've got 50%. So again, if anyone hasn't voted, go ahead and vote now. We'll give 10 more seconds. I'm up to 62%. Let's see if we can get it to 70%. Okay, so looks like getting close. All right, so we are at 66%, and I'm gonna go ahead and close the voting. And then let's see, oh, we got 71%.
So close. All right, so I'm going to share. So it looks like 46% said, which is the highest of the percentages here, no and no plans to deploy one. And then 30% says no, but planning to deploy one within 6 to 12 months, and then 14% is no, but planning to deploy one in 6 months, and then 11% is yes. So it looks like it went from lowest or from highest to the lowest, from D kind of backwards, D, C, B, and A, with A being the lowest and D being the highest. Okay, so let me go ahead and hide that, and then let's jump into what the pain points are in the manual collection and validation of U.S. vendor banking. Now, the biggest one, again, I am preaching to the choir on this one, is really just the collection via risky email, because it's really no way to prove who that email is coming from. And so we know now that fraudsters can get into the vendor's actual email account, right? They can hack into it, or maybe they don't even have to hack into it because they've gotten the vendor's username and password. And of course, they may use it in different platforms. And yes, they also use it for their email. So the fraudsters are sending the request from the actual vendor's email account. So you really just have no way of knowing who that request is coming from. And then the second one here is, even when you get that, let's say you get that email with a bank account change, and now you're going to make that confirmation call, it's really no longer that guarantee that it's going to prevent a payment from being sent to a fraudulent account. First off, it's getting harder to even get the right contact information, because if you don't have it on file and you try to go to the vendor's website, lots of vendors are pulling their AR, their accounts receivable contact information, off of their websites for the same reason you're trying to cause, because of fraud. And so that's getting harder to find if you don't already have it on your the information on your vendor master file. And then when you do, and I will say, especially if you yourself are not personally, right, making those confirmation calls, you actually have no idea that 100% of the time those confirmation calls are being conducted correctly, are being that the people that are making those confirmation calls are actually calling a number that belongs to the vendor. More often than not, you still see where those confirmation calls are being made using the information in the email. Now, I know that that's not right. You know that that's not right, but I've seen press releases, and I've had a couple clients back in 2022 when exactly that happened, just because they were trying to check it off their list. They had to get the work done, and that's how they got it done, resulted in a fraudulent payment. And so that confirmation call is not the silver bullet, because if it was, then we would have no fraud. Now, the next one is the vendors themselves, right? So talk about having valid payments. That's hard to do when the vendors themselves send you outdated banking information. And one of the ways they do that is banks merge and are acquired all the time. And when you're asking for that vendor banking on vendor letterhead or bank letterhead or on a check, that information can be old, and the vendors don't always pay attention to when that information changes, especially if it did not change their accounting or their bank account number. And so they themselves can send you outdated information. Also, they can send you a routing number that is wrong for the type of payment, because routing numbers can be for ACHs, and it can have a separate one for wires. And they don't always know that either. They just give you whatever is on the check. And then speaking of that, if the vendors, for example, do give you wrong information, if it's just the routing number, your bank or the vendor's bank, one of them will make the change and go ahead and make sure that payment is successful, but they won't do that forever. If you do not eventually make that change, they can report you for a NACHA violation, and now you're susceptible to the NACHA, any NACHA fines. And so you want to make sure that that information is always valid, because you don't want NACHA fines, but you also don't want all the rework that comes with return payments. So we do need to avoid fraud and return payments. We'll learn more about how financial operations networks, their vendor info standalone validation portal, and how their vendor self-registration portal can provide that automation, right, to help you avoid fraud and return payments. But first, let's get into the 5 in 5 steps so you can have some takeaways that you can put into your manual process immediately. All right, so 5 steps to validate your vendor's U.S. bank account details. Now, step 1 is to validate authenticating data collected. Now, the first thing here is you want to make sure, if you can, that you collect that banking information on a secure platform. So there are secure email providers out there. Maybe your current email provider has a feature that can add security to the collection of email. I've also seen where teams will use secure email folders, like a transfer folder, or maybe even something like what am I thinking of? The Microsoft SharePoint, right? So some type of a secure drive to collect that information, anything to get it out of unsecure email. And then you want to make sure that you are collecting authenticating data, starting with vendor information. Make sure you're collecting their tax ID, their remittance address, their country. The more information you can collect from the vendor that you can use to authenticate what's already in your existing vendor file, one, ensures that you are collecting it from your vendor, but 2, it's a deterrence for the fraudsters, because the more information you ask, they may just give up and go on to the next potential victim that's not asking all those questions. In addition, collect authenticating banking information. So you want to collect the bank country. Now, if you compare the bank country to the vendor country, if those are 2 separate countries, guess what? That is a red flag. Also, for banking changes, you always want to collect the previous banking, because now you can compare the previous banking to the banking that is on your vendor record. And if they push back, or if it's different, that is an immediate red flag that either you are not dealing with the correct person at the vendor's place of business, or that is a fraudulent request. And then lastly, you want to collect authenticating data internally. So collect authenticating internal employee information. Who do they have a relationship with? This is especially great for those vendors that are non-PO vendors. And then that way, you've got someone to contact if the email or any of the information they submitted is suspicious. So you want the name and the email. And also, all of this authenticating data, collecting it, is still a deterrence, right, from for the fraudsters to just abandon that request and again go on to another potential victim that's not asking all of these questions. Now, a very easy way to collect all of this information is to create your own banking form and make sure all of this information plus anything else you want to collect is included on that banking form. Now, step 2 is, once you have gotten that information and you validate it or authenticate it, right, that it's actually came from your vendor, Now you want to start the validation process. And the first part of that is the actual bank branch details. Again, I talked about how the vendors don't always pay attention when things change, and that goes for addresses too. So you want to make sure that you validate the address. You want that clean banking table, right? Any of you that are on that have SAP, you know, right, that is it the BNKA table? Oh my God, that was always on our list to clean up. So you want to make sure you validate bank branch information, including the address. And I put confirm country on here too, because many fraudsters will just put a US country, right, thinking that you're not going to check. But guess what? You are going to check. The next one is you want to validate the routing number. And I talked before, again, about how banks merge and get acquired all the time, right, which changes their routing number, but the vendor will still send you the voided checks, right, from the stash of voided checks that they've had for years and years, or an old banking on vendor letterhead or bank letterhead, not understanding that they need to send you the updated information. So you do need to validate it. Plus, you need to validate that the ACH and wire payments you're using the correct routing number for each. Now, I did give you from my resources, and this includes more than just US, but the top here is the Federal Reserve for US banks, and you can validate that ACH and wire routing number. I did give you the resources to validate bank branch details for countries, non-US countries that use IBAN and non-US countries that do not use an IBAN. But with each of these, you can validate that routing number and may also be able to validate the address as well. All right, so that was step 2. Step 3, and I am going to break this confirmation call down into 2 steps. So the first step is the confirmation call before you update that information in your accounting system or ERP. So if you can, and I know I just talked about the fact that you may not even have a valid contact, but if you do, and if you have more than one, reach out to or try to reach out or get the information to reach out to a different contact than the contact that requested the change, and that can avoid any occupational fraud on the vendor's end as well. I also recommend, because I talked before about how the confirmation calls don't always stop that fraudulent payment because they're really not being conducted correctly. Create a script, and I did include an example here of a script, a conversation when there is a change banking request. And as you can see, I have information in here to introduce yourself, because remember, they don't know who you are when you call either. And I also have information in here to authenticate them to make sure that even if someone did use the contact information in the requesting email, there's still an authentication process included. And then I also included some dialogue for if they're not the right person, like how to exit that information or that confirmation call gracefully, especially if they did not authenticate and it wasn't successful. All right, now step 4 is a bank account validation, and this is again for when you have that manual process. You do not yet have like automatic bank account ownership validation. You still have options, and this may come in your as a part of your accounting system or ERP. You've got a couple options. The first one is a pre-note. It will verify if the payment will be successful. Keep in mind though, it doesn't replace bank account ownership validation, because while some banks may verify the bank account holder name equals the vendor's name, not all of them do that. And even if they did, that's not what's returned in the file to you. So it's good to make sure that the payment will be successful, but it should not be used for bank account ownership validation. The other one is the micro deposit or the penny test. Now, this is a manual process, but it is available for you to verify or have your vendor verify that they received whatever that amount is under $1. The bad news is again, it's a manual process. It does require the vendor's participation, and it usually requires continual follow-up to make sure that you get confirmation from the vendor, and so that turnaround time can be a little longer, but those two options are available and will at the very least help you to avoid return payments so that you can avoid those potential notch fines. All right, now step 5 is the second part of that confirmation call, and that is if you have a payment that's over a certain amount, that a certain threshold, that also had a bank account add or a bank account change, because remember, you can also be adding a bank account when you're converting vendors from check payments to ACH payments. You can make that a confirmation call after that payment gets sent in the pay file. And you can ask that vendor, did they receive it? Now, when you do that, make sure that you ask for the amount, because you know some vendors get multiple payments. You don't really want to confirm that $20 payment, but what you do want to confirm is that $15,000 payment or that $15 million payment. And if you do that, now you have the time to recover it if the vendor indicates they didn't receive it. And so here's the timing, right? Wires, if you're wiring, you can call the same day and verify they received it. If it's an ACH, if it's a same day ACH, same thing, call the same day. Or if not, if it's a regular ACH, you can call within 48 hours and just verify that they received the payment. Now, again, you do not have to do this for all your vendor payments. You can identify a specific payment threshold. You can identify as just for those vendors that have had a recent bank change, 30 days, 90 days, 60 days, whatever month or days threshold you want to use, and then contact those vendors. What I like to say is how much can you afford to lose, or how much can your company afford to lose, and anything above that amount, or maybe it's how much can your company not afford to lose. Either way, identify the threshold, and anything at that threshold and above, you can only call those vendors. But I had one client that said they can't afford to lose anything, and so they called all vendors that had payments that also had a recent bank change. All right, so those are the 5 steps. I will go over it again. One is validate authenticating data. So collect it and validate it to deter fraudsters from submitting fraudulent information. And then once you get that information, validate the bank branch details. But before you enter that information in, make sure you do that part 1 of the confirmation call, where you're confirming that the request for the bank change was valid. And then also step 4 was bank assisted account validation, because you want to verify that that payment will be successful. And in the penny test, you can also verify that the vendor, it is the vendor that vendor's bank account that you're actually paying. And then step 5, the last one, is that part 2 of the confirmation call, when you have a vendor's payment over a certain threshold, who have also had a recent bank change. So that is 5 steps to avoid fraud and returned payments. But I talked before about how financial operations networks can help. And the way that they can help is to get all that down to one step using bank account ownership validation. So it's doing the same thing, avoiding fraud and return payments, just doing it faster. And here's more information. There are really 2 options for vendor onboarding, and really both include checking your vendor's bank branch information and bank account ownership. So first, there's the vendor self-registration portal where you can digitize and streamline the collection and validation of vendor information during onboarding, really getting it out of that risky email. But there's also a standalone tool just for AP to perform multiple validations at the same time. And that does include bank account ownership, but it also includes that IRS 10 match, address standardization, sanctions list, and more. Now you can click on each for more information or just contact Financial Operations Networks by email or phone. And don't forget to download the handout, How to Reduce Risk of Payment Fraud Through the Automatic Verification of Bank Account Ownership. All right, so here's some quick information on if you'd like to connect with me. I've got all my contact information there. All right, guys, so thank you very much. I appreciate everyone attending this webinar. Hopefully I wasn't cutting out for everyone, but watch out tomorrow for a separate link to the recording and the handouts, and be sure to share it with any colleagues that you think would find this information valuable. So thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Again, hope you found some valuable content. All right, so thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 298th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.